Thank you for joining us on Wednesdays.
It has been a great experience.
We've analysed, we've segmented, we've priced, and we've positioned,
Sliced and diced.
Stop the silos.
Gave practical advice.
Went all business and leisure.
We talked a lot about recovery best practices. Now it's time to put revenue management back into focus.
Let us help you become future-proof hotelier.
We will share our best practices and advice with you, starting from the beginning.
revenue hacks, back to basics.
Revenue hacks, back to basics.
Revenue hacks, back to basics.
Revenue hacks, back to the basics.
Revenue hacks, back to basics.
Hi, good afternoon everyone, and you're very welcome to another edition of Revenue Hacks. My name is Christina Ridge. I'm going to be your host this week, and we're joined by our fantastic panel who are always with us every week. So this week we're talking about forecasting and budgeting. We're very excited. We spent a lot of time yesterday discussing this and going back and forth, so I can't wait for us all to kind of hop into that conversation. But before we do that, let's have quick introductions with everyone, just in case it's your first time joining us here at WHTT's Revenue Hacks today. So do you want to start, Suzanne?
Hi, yes, I'm Suzanne Williams. I'm the Revenue and Systems Director at Journey. We are a luxury marketing agency with hotels all over the world, and you'll see me on LinkedIn today causing trouble.
B?
Great. Hi, I'm B. I'm the founder of MyOC. It's a consulting company helping hotels optimizing their revenue processes and the way they work.
Ali?
Hi, I'm Ali Northfield, the Managing Director of Revenue by Design. We provide revenue management outsourced services for hotels.
And last but not least, Olga.
Good afternoon. My name is Olga Soma. I'm a revenue specialist with experience working in a five-star boutique luxury market as well as large international hotel chains. Thank you.
So if this is your first time joining us, obviously you can follow WHTT on all social media channels. We're here every week on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock, which is great. We're always helping everyone and getting through as much as we can. Suzanne will be answering all your questions on LinkedIn today and pass them over to us here at the team. And also, if you've got any questions through anything else, we'll see them pop up at the bottom of the screen, especially if you're on YouTube Live. So don't worry, we will get to them as soon as we can. If we can't, we will come back and answer all your questions. Trust me, we're very good at this. And if you want to reach out to us one-on-one direct, please feel free to do so too. So let's kick off today's call. And we're talking about budgeting and forecasting, because obviously we're going into a time where we need to restructure our budgets and restructure our forecasting and what we believe for the future. So obviously a budget should be almost a holistic view, looking at, from the outside in, and it should very much take into account realistic commercial ideas from next year. And obviously sales, GMs, everyone needs to have a hand in creating this. Ladies, thoughts about budgets at the moment with COVID?
It's a nightmare.
How are you finding it be at the moment with all your properties? Because obviously you do a lot of consulting work. So how are you finding it with your clients?
I think it's a bit of a struggle currently, but it's also a very important time for the team to refocus on the type of business that they want and they can target at the moment. So it's kind of like making sure that we don't do it the way that lots of hotels are kept on doing every year. It's like, oh, how can I increase by 5%? And you just add up this 5% across the board and that's it. Here it's about rethinking the whole commercial strategy and think like, okay, we need to make this amount of revenue. How do we reach that? And what's the new, what new type of business do I need? Or where do we need to ask for investment, for example, into some different type of distribution in order to achieve that? So yeah, that's quite key that the entire team sit down and really try to have a great overview of what they're expecting and how are they going to reach that. The whole commercial team and then the top management, of course.
And Ali, what are you seeing at the moment on your side?
I guess we're seeing certainly just in the very immediate short term is the requirement for understanding exactly how much the hotel really needs to make from a budget perspective. So since we've only really just had the go ahead in the UK for reopening early July, the main focus at the moment is really budgeting for making sure that the break-even point is met, and so that the hotel is actually going to be positioning itself in a way that it can just get through the next few months. Beyond that, the typical approach is really to keep in mind the original budget that was there for 2020, just keeping that as a benchmark in terms of just understanding where we might have been, and then working towards whatever demand we can see, really. And again, as B said, really looking at new market segments, looking at the ones that have disappeared, and really trying to work out what level of business we're likely to get from new sources at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I think we've touched on market segments. If you haven't actually seen our episode, we actually covered it last week and the week before, and pretty much every other week we've actually touched on the importance of market segments. But we're back to basics. So we almost sound like a broken record, but it's so important. Olga, what are your top tips if you were to actually write a budget today for a property? What would you recommend people do?
I think, well, in a COVID-19 situation, I think it's very different to the standard procedure. We would look at historical data, we would look at the events, what are the best kind of market segments. But right now, as you said, it's very much just going back to basics and looking where your potential may come from and really maximizing. So I think lots of revenue managers right now going back to the roles will be, or who went recently back to their hotels, will be pretty much, yes, having that budget initially aside, and then looking at where are the potentials and maximizing their strategy, and talking with and working together very closely with sales and marketing teams to start really ball rolling. But on a normal scenario, budget would be there are two scenarios what I've seen in my experience. One is very well analyzed and a lot of thought process goes into it, and usually those budgets are fairly realistic. They can be still quite ambitious, but realistic. And the second scenario is when the kind of directive comes from the ownership or leadership team, and then revenue managers need to work backwards from that and try to meet those targets. So the first approach probably the best, but that's a real life scenario. So it's not always the case. I have seen the hotels working with two budgets, side by side, and sometimes even budgets are created for stakeholders and banks, and that is left aside and going to pretty much revenue managers working from the forecast. Not the best practice, but that's what sometimes happens in some properties. Hopefully it's just exception to the rules.
I know, and actually funny enough you say that about bank budgets, because that's what a lot of hotels do. There's a lot of companies across the UK and Ireland and across the world who actually have 2 and 3 budgets, and it's very true. They've got the hotel one, the one that the hotel said they wanted to do that head office overruled, and then they've got their bank budget on top of it. How important is it now more than ever for stakeholders to really listen to revenue managers? And do you all believe that total revenue management is key now when we're doing our budgets, or do you still think the traditional old style of budget, which is basically the revenue manager doing the revenue side and F&B doing the F&B side, and then it all just going into a P&L, into an Excel sheet that no one sometimes can read?
I think it's more important than ever, actually, because hotels may have more opportunities in those segments also. So you'll need to probably revenue manage that a little bit better, and also really understand the underlines of any budget, meaning that this is a P&L, and at the end of the day that you're doing. It's not a budget of how much revenue you can do, it's how much bottom line you can get, actually. So it's quite important that RMs are more involved into understanding the costs, so understanding the needs from the stakeholders, and try to see where they can really help by reducing those costs as much as we can.
Ali, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm certainly, I guess, looking at the total revenue makes more sense right now, just to have an understanding of where the hotel needs to accommodate shortfalls in various different profit centres. So certainly groups business, MICE, F&B, all of these areas are going to be certainly in the immediate future suffering from social distancing rules, which would mean definitively inability to achieve revenues that they would expect. Plus a lack of understanding, well, not lack of understanding, but at the moment a lack of knowledge about the behavior of demand. So demand characteristics are likely to change, and so we need to be able to accommodate that in our thought process and work towards, as a team, with all of the different departments, to understand where, if there's a shortfall in one department, how we're going to try and make it up through different sources, either through segment or through channel. So yeah.
And actually, funny you mentioned that, because we just had a question from Niels. Niels, hi, you're very welcome. Normally always with us every week. Are market segments more important than channel segments? And should we have guest types with personal preferences like marketing to use in order to become more granular? Who wants to take that one?
I would say for me, market segments are more important than channel segments, because you then can target your marketing campaign going from very wide approach. You can target much better, and usually you will see better return on investment from that perspective. I think some channels are actually losing its power, and hotels are gaining some of it back just because of what the hotels had go through, and the hotels had much more access to the customers recently. So I think there possibly will be change in power or segment, or how much goes through each channel as well. So for me, market segmentation are really important, but I think those market segments are changing and behavior is changing as well between them.
B, what's your thoughts?
I'll moderate that, actually. I tend to go more for channel segments rather than market segments. I think it's really like where we can see the cost of the distribution, and if we make a blend of market segment and channel segments, which very often some of them are actually kind of similar, like talking about OTS, for example, but this is quite important now to really target the right channels, and you can ask your marketing to also target specific channels, because you're not going to talk to your clients that are booking an OTA the same way than a client that are booking, a GDS, etc. So you need to have probably different offers there, I think.
Absolutely. I think one thing people need to take into account for sure over the next while is the market demand in the areas and customers' behavior when they're writing budgets. If you've been a property that's been a length of stay for quite a long time, you might only have a 1 night, 2 night stay now, because that's what people will be happy to come in, especially into big cities. What's your thoughts on that when it comes to actually analysing that type of information for a budget formation?
Me?
Any one of you. Whichever one of you is writing budgets at the moment, because I'm done. I've put my hands up, my budgets are all done, which is great. And sleepers, a lot of properties do take sleepers into account, the length of stay especially. In driving profits.
Yeah, it's quite important, but it's hard to. It's sometimes quite hard because back to the question from Niels, like being super granular, you may lost yourself basically. So is it that important? I'm not so sure. I think we need tools like CRM, etc., to help then target some specific markets, but. You still need to keep the big picture, I think, when you do your budget.
Yeah. Ali, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, the market segmentation is still important, because you can just analyze the behavioral characteristics of that segment and understand the combination of channel and market performance together. So segmentation first, and then the channel side is obviously consumer choice, but it's also a cost element. And I think for me, the balancing the two together is important, and separating them out. I feel at the moment, and I can't qualify it, but I feel that for some guests, there's going to be a certain level of insecurity around how they travel and what's likely to be at the end of that customer journey. And so I think there will be a lot more interaction with the hotel directly, and I'm hoping that will also can convert to direct bookings. But you need to set that up as a property, and I know that's not about budgeting, but I just feel that maybe there's an opportunity to actually put within the budget some level of support from a marketing and communications point of view, to support those customers who are still a little bit uncertain about kind of what's at the end of their travel journey. So.
Agree
If
with
I
you
may-
100%.
If I may add to that, even if we look at the success of bookings.com, because the reason why they're so successful is platform is kind of really simple. We're usually short on time. Right now, with only 6 months left in the year, maybe we'll take 2 or 3 trips. And we have time to explore. We're looking for really inspiration. We need something to look forward to. So as a inspiration, I don't think really OTS is a place to start your search for a holiday, if I'm really honest. I think hotels will have right now much more power back. And it goes more to what hotels are doing themselves on the property. And as Sally said, maybe there should be more assigned to marketing campaigns and maybe in-house teams, etc. And we know that reservations teams right now got access to all the guests that were anxious at the beginning about the cancellations. We had a chance to communicate and convert them to our new loyal customers. So I think there is a great opportunity, and a lot of hotels done it really successfully as well.
There has been, and I think that's one thing a lot of people have taken from this is the properties themselves, when they've been communicating with the guests, is doing their best to convert that business back, which hopefully will help with their budgeting. But going on from budgets to forecasting, which is always a tricky one because people have different ideas on forecasting and different ways of forecasting. I think when we're just talking about the budgets, just make sure you've got a really good document and a good sheet and you've got all your data all together so that you can actually make the proper decisions and relay this information and get stakeholders involved. But when you're talking about forecasting, ladies, what are your rules? Because I showed you like all my little tips yesterday and there wasn't even enough to put on a slide. It was just too long. We could talk about this for days, or forecasting methods. Olga, what were your forecasting methods when you've been in properties for a long time, and what are you advising clients at the moment for the future?
The forecast is, in simple terms, it's you're predicting your future, predicting behavior. And yes, normally you would take into account historical data and what is currently you have actually in the books. Coming out of the COVID-19 situation and the lockdown, I think we'll be looking less, of course, into historical data. It becomes more of a reference point. But you will be looking more into what is the current information? What do you have on the books? And that's not only for bedrooms, but for MICE and other events. What is your pace? What is availability on the market? What is your own availability? I'm actually hearing a lot of stories and examples from general managers and revenue leaders saying that their hotels are already overbooked or fully booked on a certain date. And it goes back to you really need, it may seem like there's just a few days, but that can happen if there is lack of communication and we are not maybe forecasting enough, because as we know, groups and MICE business can be booked 2-4 years ahead, and some of that business is still happening. In fact, business that had to be cancelled or postponed for now moved into next year. So there will be more focus, I think, on actually what is happening right now on the current data. We're going back to forecast starting from scratch, from base, because a lot of base business has been lost. So we're going to focus from zero pretty much and then take it from there. And that will be, I think, revenue managers right now will be doing focus probably more often, especially short term rather than long term. So focus probably will be on 3 months as usual, with main focus on the current months.
And speaking about that, because we did touch on the forecasting part last week on how many times people do a forecast in a week, and a month, and a day, and everything. B, what are your thoughts on that? Because it was a minefield between all of us on the call yesterday, and even Suzanne, who I know is on LinkedIn at the moment, I'm sure she's just saying her piece already.
Yeah, I think there's two situations. There's like the normal situation when there were trends, etc., and in which I wouldn't see the point of redoing a forecast every day or every week. You're supposed to enter your months knowing what's going to happen. So of course, there's always some adjustments, and you need to take that into account. But the majority of your base business is going to be there. Your groups are going to be confirmed, etc. So I would think it's a lot of waste of time sometimes to do that, even if it's good to keep an eye and do some last minute adjustments, of course. But it's better to look at the upcoming few months and where you actually need to get some help from your from brand, from marketing, sales, etc. But there's now and now it's a little bit tricky because of course. I think nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen, and we need to review the trend that keeps on changing and pick up coming. So you kind of sometimes double your number within a week, and it's normal. But I think we need to review that. Maybe it's having an overview every week, but always keeping in mind that we need to be also more confident. And what I felt the last few weeks is that people are being so cautious, then there's no accuracy at all in the forecast, which is understandable. But on the other hand, if you want as a company to really start looking forward and being able to invest probably, or try to understand how they will move forward with their teams, etc., you need to put yourself in the water, basically. You need to make sure that you're confident, which is tough.
That brings us to the accuracy. You mentioned the word, not me. The industry average is like 3 to 5% either way. You know, Ali, what's your thoughts on people being accurate with their forecasting and also the under forecasting? Because we all know revenue managers, we like to play our cards a little bit closer to our chest. A lot of us aren't that brave to actually put all our cards on the table sometimes. And obviously people find that if they under forecast, the better they look on certain circumstances, especially if it's a tough month. So Ali, what are your thoughts and what would you recommend to people going forward in the future so that, you know, revenue is seen as a, you know, we're not hiding anything essentially?
I think that there's a few things in that. So just in terms of targeted accuracy for forecasting, I think the danger is that that obviously a revenue manager is a controller in terms of what business they accept and deny, and if they're targeted to be within a certain percentage, then we'll make it within that certain percentage. And so you have to be in, and that could be not necessarily looking at the entire demand picture with a level of truthfulness. So we just have to be a bit careful, because if you over target revenue managers on percentage accuracy, they'll just make it happen. So that's one side. In terms of the actual figure, I mean, typically, you know, the industry standard of 3 to 5% is there because it's achievable. And I guess the thing for the moment is that if you have been monitoring pace and you're continuing to monitor pace on a daily basis, ideally by market segment, and you're understanding kind of where your shortfalls are and where you're perhaps overpacing on new segments, then you should still be able to forecast relatively accurately, even though behavioral characteristics are different. You're still looking at data in the same way. So the principles don't change. It may well be that you have some nice surprises, but I think ideally we should keep looking at the different levels of data that you look at, and the pace and pick up at the moment in the next 30, 60, 90 days is going to be more important, I guess, than other data that you typically look at, which will be your historical data on the book and your events data. Obviously, that kind of data is a lot of it's lost. So you need to rely on what you can see.
And actually, funny enough, you mentioned an event. We just had a question from Marion, and if anyone's watching LinkedIn Live or YouTube Live, you've got questions for the panel, please feel free to ask. Suzanne is there as well to help out today. If an important event in the city, if my booking pace doesn't work, which is the moment to the flexibility of the restrictions? So I assume what she's asking is, how far out do you look at your events, and then when do you decide to change it from a non-refundable to a bar flex rate, or, you know, soften your restrictions for that in your forecasting? Anyone?
I think so many dependables. There's so many dependables. It's really difficult. It's a tricky one because before you start placing restrictions, you would want to see that demand is there. So at what point it didn't happen? Like, why would you even put restrictions? If yes, it may be. If it also depends how big an event is. It historical, repeating, and you expecting. And also depends what is the behavior for that particular segment. If it's transient and the booking window is within those 30 days, then that will be the period. I suppose not before that. You know, you would need to know the behavior for each segment and their booking pattern and trends. So it does depend a lot.
Yeah, I think it's important to qualify your event, really, which is often what we don't spend enough time on. It's like this may be a big event, but does it really have an impact on your business? Because probably the business is coming, I don't know, is local, for example, then yeah, you may have a lot of people around, but they're not going to stay at your place, or this is not exactly the type of, you're not exactly the type of hotel that would be appealing for this crowd, etc. So this is quite important. And I think we cannot have a general answer on that, but really if you have your typical pickup curve for this type of event, or at least what you're expecting, even with the new norm, as Ali was saying, trends, there are some trends that are going to be, I think, similar, and this is the same way of looking at the data. If every day you're deceived basically, and you're not seeing what you're supposed to be seeing, then yeah, that's maybe a good time to play with your restrictions, like soften it, and try and test if this has a reaction or not.
Yeah, and I think also it's good to take note of if it's like a super high demand event, take note of how consumers have behaved in the past. So, for example, if you look at sort of various fixtures like football fixtures, like cup finals, the last one. Crikey, was it Madrid or Barcelona? I'm terribly bad at that. I'm not very good at football. But anyway, what happened was that a lot of people found different ways in different cities to stay in because the actual rates in the city were so high, it was ridiculous. So I think people are wising up to huge restrictions, rate being a kind of one type of restriction that you can use. So if you've got a really high rate and you've got minimum length of stay in your city and people just feel it's unreasonable, then, you know, the idea really is to reverse your approach and make sure there is some demand, as Bea said, first of all, and get that base business in, and then yield into, rather than setting an event date so high that you become you're gouging the market and it becomes unreasonable.
I've got an interesting question, and I'm going to put it out there. Do you guys forecast by day or do you forecast by market segment? So that's really important. A lot of people do both. I know that we do both, because obviously you want to have that daily snapshot in the month plus then the future for the next 3 months. But you know how we do it once a week, obviously, as well, just to clarify. But you know, we do the market segment and the daily forecast. What are your thoughts on that, guys? How do you operate this?
I can take this one to start with. I do by day by market segment, rate and occupancy. And for me, I have it depends what system you use, whether you have forecast or budget broken down by day and by market segment, whether you have the technical capabilities. You may have also great summaries, but I do like to have into really nitty gritty. So having it by day by market segment, for me, that's the best way. That's how I prefer to approach it.
Bea, how do you see it for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you can, and when you have the tools, it's quite good to do it at a detail level. In previous roles, when I was really looking after a forecast, I always looked at a more macro level, meaning that if you have 15 market segments, there's no way I'm going to forecast by market segment. So it's more about doing something that is meaningful. So it would be like the main top segment, whether it's group, transient, OTAs, etc., and that's it. But again, it really depends on the business that you have. I think each hotels are like, if you really have a business mix, for example, that is massively impacted by some specific groups, well, you may want to go into that level of detail. Otherwise, you'll get lost. But yeah, the more detailed you can be, the better it is. But again, it's a matter of finding the trade-off between spending too much time for something that is not going to bring you that much, or if you have enough information by doing a softer one, or at least the reviewed one. You don't need to maybe go into that much level of details.
Ali, what do you recommend here?
Ideally by market segment by day, but without a revenue management system, I would be very cautious about giving someone the manual opportunity to do that. I say opportunity with caution. I think also you need to bear in mind as well that if you are doing a granular forecast, that if there are mistakes in that forecast and you aggregate that up into a total forecast for the hotel, then you're going to find that those mistakes still exist, and they become lost in the bigger mix. So you just have to be careful that if there are flaws in the forecasting, then you need to know where that flaw is, and often you don't, because you've done it in such a granular level that it becomes lost in the mists of the total property forecast, and then you don't understand where necessarily you need to be careful of the validity of that forecast at any one time. So yeah, pros and cons.
I think that's so true. And I think if anyone's watching, go and check all your Excel sheets if you're using Excel for doing your forecasts, and make sure everything is up to date. Your formulas are correct. Your days of the week are correct. You're pulling the right information, because we've seen it, each one of us, I'm sure, over time. There's always been an error If it's a shared document, people can go and change everything. So just check it, because when you're submitting this information to head offices and to owners and stakeholders and banks, it can be detrimental, especially when it comes to numbers, for sure.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I thought was interesting was
something. Sorry, Christina, on that. I think one thing that's really interesting is to, when you do it by day, by segment, is to really always do the zoom in, zoom out, and try to see the consistency between your different months or so. That's quite important, because that's very often, and it's the same for budget actually. Very often you get lost and you do month by month, and you don't really think about the consistency, and you'll end up with a business mix that doesn't make sense across the time. So yeah, I would advise people to really look at that also.
I think what's really interesting is Nikki Cooper, one of our regulars who actually watches the show, has just commented there saying, be mindful of your comp set. Some have gone out of business, so how will this affect you and your strategy going forward? Which I think is, everyone knows this is going to happen over the next while, for sure. In Ireland especially, we've had a few hotels go into liquidation this week. And in the UK, we've seen it as well. So if you have properties that are closed nearby you and you're reopening on the 4th of July and they're not opening sooner, then just be mindful of, the overflow that might happen for you, how that's going to go. And you all mentioned earlier on that business for 2021 has gone into, or 2020 has gone into 2021. So watch 2021, be optimistic, at the same time, but keep an eye on your rates, keep an eye on your business and your market segments, especially because you can have that creep that you probably won't even spot if you're not watching everything ahead. So that's where I was going. What my next part was, yesterday, everyone kind of touched on this point that data is different at every different level. So, obviously you've got on the day data, you've got 7, 10, 15, 30, 60, 90 days out. What is your rule of thumb when you're looking at data? Do you obviously focus almost a year out, but how many times when you're forecasting in the month, do you actually look a full year ahead? Or even do you bother looking a full year ahead within the month?
You have to.
Yeah.
You'd be
surprised. You would be surprised. But what would you recommend? How many times do you actually look ahead? At the moment, it's a little bit different because obviously we're watching every penny and every booking that comes in. But, how many times within a month would you actually look at your client's business a whole year out?
I think you glance at it every week. You just have a look of has anything happened. So it doesn't mean that you need to really go into details of what's going to be my forecast for, June 2021. But you definitely need to have a look at it, especially when you're working with group business, because they're already booking. So you need to make sure that your pricing is there, that you're open on all the systems, and that you're prepared and you're not filling your hotel with series blocks, whatever, because you just want business to come in, for example.
Ali?
Yeah, definitely. Certainly, we look at the year ahead every day, just to make sure there's nothing unusual that's happened or something we didn't anticipate. But typically now, I think, certainly for cities where maybe they're international style cities with a lot of events, you need to be super careful that because you've probably got people that have rebooked for the following year, you're already looking at possibly significantly more business on the books for 2021 than you would have anticipated from the year before, albeit that might not be guaranteed business, but so there's an element of risk in it, a risk of cancellation. But certainly now I would be really cautious about ignoring the year ahead on a very regular basis. You have to do that. And daily for me, if my team don't do it, I'd be asking them why.
Olga.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was also looking into maybe on a once a week while doing forecast, not necessarily for the next 365 days, but I would still look in every single month. And also it depends on the size of the property. One of my biggest hotels was very busy with MICE and group business, and for that property I was changing forecast 90 days plus or during the week as well. So if there is any large contract confirmed within the week, and I know that will impact, I need to change the strategy for, let's say, months of October, then I would already put that in place for the forecast for next week and make the changes in strategy then there, because I know that it will have implications. I need to restrict other market segments. So it does depend on properties. And yes, as Alice said, especially right now, I'm seeing a surge in demand, and there seems to be across the hotels. And 2021 definitely has a kind of a double effect of that. So yeah, I would be very careful not to miss any details, because that devil is in the detail, as we know. Thanks.
Have to agree, and especially because now more than ever we're seeing an increase in business for next year. It's just watching it, and it's the happiness of actually seeing it come in even a year in advance. It's great. But the next question for you guys is, do you actually include sales when you're actually doing your forecast, or do you even share your forecast with your sales team or anyone? You know, for instance, if you've got an abundance of rooms to sell next week, or you're slightly worried that the pickup for the next 30 days isn't really there, would you actually reach out to sales, get them involved, and get them on working on the digital side of things, get an offer or a strategy out there? Or would you just take all that stuff on board yourself? Because I know, B, I think, you know, you do digital as well. So how does that work for you guys?
Mute. I'm on mute.
Yay. No, I think it's super important, to involve them. I'm not a big fan of having like 10 people working on the forecast or on the pricing, to be honest. But however, I think when the RM has a clear picture of what's going to happen, then that's where together collectively we can work on, okay, how can we make it better? And so how can we see when we're in need of groups, for example? How can we work with sales to control a little bit more those corporates, for example? So it's quite important. And in terms of digital, there is a blend that is needed. And I think we have a topic coming up in a few weeks on that. And it's how do we make sure that we integrate this information into the routine of each of the RMs? If you have a big direct segment and your website is bringing a lot of revenue, then you have a massive database that you can use to see, maybe like having some hints on your pricing or on your offers, etc. And that's quite important. And you can do that only by working hand in hand with digital team or marketing team or whoever is managing that into your property.
Ali, what do you recommend?
Sorry. I was just looking at a comment from Rita. Anyway, marketing. So sales team, super important for them to be involved in terms of contributing to the forecast. And if there's any holes that have dropped out of the sales forecast, we just need to know really super quickly. But I think that as a mantra, just in terms of the sort of levers that you have available to you in a forecast and looking out in terms of what's available to you, typically, if you're looking at brand marketing and sort of general awareness, then that's the kind of thing that's going to kick in sort of way ahead of the day of arrival. If you're looking at sales, then typically their influence is going to be slightly less towards the day of arrival. So maybe within the last sort of 60 to 30 days, typically, in terms of how they can really influence your forecast. What you don't want to be left with is, if you're working with a really volatile situation, is just having price left to you, because as you come into day of arrival, you can either use digital sort of within the last 10 days, but then the last thing you have is price at the very end of the day, sort of really close to day of arrival, and that really isn't a good weapon to support reaching a forecast. It's the last thing on your plate, and it's not a great place to be. And I think this tendency to use price into day of arrival kind of like reflects on the reverse yielding that we were talking about last week, that a lot of revenue managers rely on price way too much, and there's only so much price can do. And you have to realize that you're not there just fiddling with the rates. You know, the forecast is there to actually define by market segment, by day, who you're expecting. Sales should be contributing, groups should be contributing. There shouldn't be any fallout within your terms and conditions, and that forecast should be solid.
I agree, and I can see Olga nodding as well when it comes to like reverse yielding. We spoke about reverse yielding last week. If you missed it, please watch the episode. We'll post the link later on today, because it's something that I think everyone has a slight pet hate for, although it still happens. Olga, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's the whole point of forecast, actually, is to identify peaks and troughs and then communicate it to sales and marketing team, works together across departments. Especially when right now we talk about more total revenue management, you know, that should be communicated as well. And the more, I think, I'm not a big fan of inviting too many people to collaborate on forecast once a week. Otherwise, it's going to be endless conversation. But yes, I would definitely communicate with a sales team. Possibly before, if certain contracts needs to be checked with groups team as well, and after the revenue meeting or during the revenue meeting, that's your perfect opportunity to communicate what is the forecast, where's the demand, where's the opportunities, where we need to start a campaign or do email blasts, or what are the actions from the forecast, really, because that's the whole point of it, really.
Absolutely. I love the way you say you don't want to have too many influences on a forecast, because essentially revenue managers now are changing into a total revenue management. So we're taking care of everything. You'll have that F&B element and the sales element, but it should be up to us to predominantly control essentially that with the influences that we have around us. But speaking on that, I think it's really interesting is Luke Syriza is after saying, that do we think it should be shared with front office, the forecast? I do, 100%. And that is a great way of actually front office learning about how forecasting works and what their influence is on selling rooms, if they do sell the rooms to walk-ins, and how many rooms we've got left to make our budget number or else our forecast number, or if it's to pay the bank. That's how I learned. I'll never forget it. We had a certain number we had to pay the bank by the close of business every Sunday, and we were a big wedding venue and we only had 3 weddings a week, so it kind of you learn from that. What's your thoughts? Who would you share that with typically? Because I know some people just share it with their head office or their GM. Some people don't even share it with the GM, I've noticed as well, in certain kind of different executive lines. So who would you recommend, Olga, would be actually included in sharing the forecast document?
You need to kind of submit the document to head office, financial controller, general manager, director of sales and marketing, front office. I would distribute, but I also like to invite all these people to the revenue meeting, even if they're not able to, let's say front office and financial control not able to come to join the meeting every single week, then every second week, because I think there needs to be much bigger discussion. And financial controller, general manager, operations team, they need to have really good understanding of revenue coming in, so the cost can be managed as well. We seem to be talking more about that when it's a Christmas period, because staffing levels are really important during that period of time, but actually it's relevant for every single week and month. So I would say it's director of sales, marketing, general manager, financial controller, front office, groups, MICE. It depends, pretty much all HODs or whoever's in your executive leaders team.
Yeah, I think definitely all your HODs. End of the day, that's the revenue that the hotel is making that is gonna feed everybody, basically. So yeah, it's quite important to make sure that everybody is aware of where we are and looking more at the long term. I think we shouldn't forget front office, because they are the ones that are helping bringing this additional revenue that we usually forget about, like the upselling, the day use, etc. And that can be quite a good amount every month, depending on your hotels. And then you have your reservation team, your sales team. So it's about motivating them also. One silly thing that I've been doing in the past is like making sure that the numbers are up on a board every day or on a screen or wherever, but making sure that they see the pickup, they see the impact that they had, how much revenue they've actually generated, and how far away we are from the budget. And it was celebration day every time we were reaching budget and going above, and they were all incentivized on actually beating that, and that's great, because you can see a healthy competition between people and on how can I make it better, or I need to make this extra 2K, I'm gonna make it, and I think that's quite powerful. Actually, we underestimate that, I think.
I love the way you mentioned a board. I kind of feel like they're forgotten about in hotels. I've seen them being taken down over the last few years in certain properties. Ali, do you think all this information should be put on a board for people to walk into, a back office or a sales office, so that they can actually see where we are and where we need to be?
Oh yeah, definitely. I love boards. They are the best thing for helping people understand exactly where they need to get to. Especially to Bee's point, if you're coming into trying to achieve budget, say within the month, so you've got your last 3-4 revenue meetings to achieve that month's budget, then to a certain extent you might find that given other market segments, you're reliant heavily on the front desk being able to upsell, or you're reliant on certain room category sales. And if the res team and the front office team are not aware of that, then you've lost your ammunition to get that budget and to really achieve that budget. and breaking that down into X number of upsells, X number of different room type sales that need to be achieved can make it really simple and make it really achievable for them. And so they can really, and then they really know that they've actually helped you make budget, which is huge. And and you need a board for that. They need to be able to see exactly where they are at any one time. Definitely. It's lovely. Love boards.
Yeah, and I love the like B says, the incentivization as well of staff to get them on board.
Totally.
Upselling balcony rooms and higher category rooms is always so important, so that we can actually get over that number. Because you know what, selling something for 50 quid could be what's going to get us over the line to break even at some point over the next few weeks. We've actually come to the end of the time. Just imagine it's gone so fast. Firstly, I'd like to thank Suzanne for taking care of all LinkedIn. It's been so strange today. We've had some questions, but because Suzanne's been answering a lot of them, I actually don't have a lot of questions for you guys. It's great. Thanks a million, Suzanne. I'd like to thank all of you, B, Olga, Ali, for joining us again. Next week, we're going to be covering innovation, technology, which is going to be great. We're all super excited about this. And, obviously integrations, PMSs, and or kind of tips on that. Don't forget, tomorrow is the Future About Mice. We're meeting an event's going to be over the next few weeks and months. And what are the predictions? We've got a great lineup there, including Costas, who actually works for IHG, which is the Intercontinental Hotel Group. It's going to be great. So tune in to that tomorrow at 2:00 if you need anything at all. You know where we are. Social channels, WHTT, #revenue hacks. And we also are on LinkedIn and all the social channels. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to reach out to each one of us directly over time, and we'll put up some information after the show as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.